Hello and welcome, I'm Kara Scrivener, and today I'm going to be talking about books that I want to read in September of 2021. I never read a hard list of books. I'm very much a mood reader, and some people would be like, why do you take a TBR if you're a mood reader? It's because I really enjoy talking about the books that I want to read and then seeing how I do and stuff like that. And, I will be reading books that are not on this list, and I definitely won't be reading all of the books, but I enjoy checking off lists, and I also like letting you guys know what I'm going to be reading. So first of all, I'm going to be talking about Weather by Jenny Awful, and this is a selection of vignettes and other stories about this middle-aged woman who works at a library at a university that she used to attend but never graduated from, and she is really very insightful and very good at knowing people's feelings, but she is paid very little, and then she gets an offer from her old professor to work at her podcast and to write advice out to people who are afraid of things and like the end of the world. I have read the first 30 pages of this book a few times and I've really enjoyed them each time. Because this book is so fragmented, I really need to read it in one sitting, and it is not too long, but it's also a book that I need a few hours to read. So I'm hopefully going to feel in September, it's that color and everything, and I really feel like it is a book that I will enjoy reading in September. The second book on this list is Flanders by Daniel Devoe. I always thought this was a book that was like Northanger Abbey or Mansfield Park or any of those books that's based on a house, but it's not. This is actually a person's name. Her name is like Mole, as in like Molly Flanders, and this is based on a real-life thief and prostitute and many other women who kept on being exiled from Britain only to return and become, a thief, and Daniel Devoe interviewed her in the prison that she was in and then wrote a book about her. And I'm very intrigued to read about a man's view on a woman who was risque in the early 1800s. And obviously it's going to be full of some sexism and stuff like that, but I really have been enjoying reading late 1700s and early 1800s books, and this is a book that I'm very interested to read, even though it's probably not going to be enjoyable at times, but I'm very excited to analyze it and to really just dive in. The next book on this list is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. She is one of the authors that I'm reading through in 2021. Each year I pick authors that I want to read more of and deep dive into their work, and she is one of them. I have read two so far, The Blind Assassin and The Circle Game, and both of them I absolutely loved. So I'm very excited to dive into her most famous work, and I have read about the first 15-20 pages so far, and there's a reading vlog that will be coming out when I'm done, but I am really enjoying it. It is very interesting prose and very interesting the way that she constructs the world, and I'm very interested. I said interested too many times. I'm very intrigued to see how the story plays out. I have known the plot for a very long time, but I haven't actually lived the story yet, so I'm very interested in that. My hair is everywhere. Anne of the Island is my next book on here. This is a book that I've been reading for 2 years because in the fall of 2019, I picked it up and read like 50-60 pages. Absolutely loved it and have never finished it. Well, I finished it like 12 years ago when I was like 12, but it's been a while since I read it and I want to, and I'm really enjoying my reread of the Anne of Green Gables series. Anne of Green Gables is one of my favorite books of all time, so is the last book, Willa of Ingleside, which deals with World War I, and I am really excited to read this. This takes place in her college years and her relationship that is starting to bloom a little bit and her friendships, and it's just such an enjoyable book, but it's also a fall book, so I'm really excited to read this, especially around my birthday, because Anne is just one of my favorites. So I'm filming this on September 1st, and the next one I have already started, and this is Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. I read earlier this year A Black Woman's History of the United States, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really comprehensive look at how we envision history and how person's stories have been left out. This one is definitely evident that it was published almost a decade, well, like 6-7 years before, and that is definitely showing in how it's presented. It's a more conservative view on radical rehistory. So it is very much presenting the genocide and slaughter and reinterpreting how we see American leaders and how especially literature and how the view of historical people have reimagined and taken out the history of genocide and murder and the way that people have treated Indigenous people since Columbus arrived. And it is done in a way that is slightly more forgiving than I would like, but it is very interesting to start, and I definitely recommend it for someone who wants to know more about Indigenous history, and I think all of us should. So yeah, definitely recommend it, while also knowing that there's definitely more contemporary, not even contemporary because it's only 10 years old, but more call to action books than this one, but I am definitely enjoying reading it. It is a little bit dry though. On the list is Redemptor. The light is going to shine on it because it is glorious. This is the second book in Raybearer by Jordan Afico, and Raybearer was one of my first and favorite books of the year. I absolutely love it. It follows a girl who lives in a world inspired by African and European like mythology and culture, and she is charged by her mother in an unbreakable curse and promise to kill the king who, well, the prince who will be a king. And the issue is that she has to actually become part of his council, and that there's this ray that literally tests whether she loves him or not in order to do this. So she has to deal with the fact that she has to become close to him when also knowing that she has to kill him. And I also love that this dynamic is not a romantic one. We have seen this a lot, like assassin sent over who falls in love with a princess or prince. But no, this is very more like brotherly, sisterly dynamic, and it's very well done. It has one of the most unique magic systems and worlds that I've ever read, and I really recommend it. I also enjoy stories. It starts taking place when she's probably like 8 to 10, somewhere in this, and follows her until she's 16, 17, and I really appreciate it. Even though it's a slower start, I think that that's very important for the world building and for her building as a character and the dynamics of her friend group. The next on here is The Good Soldier, and this is by Ford Maddox Ford, and was published in 1915. This is an author I know nothing about, and a book that I hadn't heard about before I was researching it and came across it. I really love books that follow World War I. It is one of my favorite times of history. About 1890 to about 1925 is probably my favorite part of history, and I absolutely love this. So I've read a lot of books on World War I and leading up to it, but it's normally set and written in the 1920s. This was written in 1915 during just the beginning of World War I, and I'm so excited to read it. It deals with, like, you know, right before and going into World War I, and really deals with this man who is a good soldier, who has a good wife and has a good friend group and stuff like that. Well, you know, it's more of a comedy of manners. There's affairs going on and relationships with an American family and stuff like that, and I'm just very interested to read this book that no one talks about. Talking about affairs, let's talk about The Streetcar Named Desire, and this follows a woman in the 50s, I believe, who goes and needs a ride and has an affair with a man, and I don't really understand it. It's a short play and I didn't want to read a lot about it, but I'm very interested in reading more of Tennessee Williams. I'm also interested in maybe reading Snagglepuss right around this. This is a reimagining of the classic character by DC Comics, and it is, I believe, 6 volumes and goes into the history of Snagglepuss, who is very much based on Tennessee Williams dealing in the 1950s with like the Red Scare and stuff like that, and as a gay playwright who has to. And I believe Tennessee Williams was a gay man who wrote in a very interesting way to try to avoid being called a communist and being jailed for that as well, but I believe that he was on many lists. So I'm very interested to read his most famous work and then read Snagglepuss as well. Talking about authors that I made commitment to read in January, I want to read Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This is a book that I started last December and I really enjoyed and haven't picked up from the library since, so I have regrets. This book came out in 1910 and is feminist in nature because Charlotte Perkins Gilman was very involved in women's liberation and suffrage and stuff like that, and this book takes place in South America, where 3 American male men, explorers, that's what they're called, find this society of women that has been untouched by men by thousands of years, and really explores what utopian this is, and I'm sure it has many twists and turns. I really love The Yellow Wallpaper, which is one of my favorite books of all time, which is by her, and I've read some of her other short stories, so this is her one novel, and I'm very intrigued to finish it, hopefully in September. Again, it feels very much like a fall book. The next book on the list is Never Let Me Go by Kazu Ashiro. I'm very excited to read through his work after reading Claire in the Sun last month. I have a dedicated review that I will link above, and I found it very interesting. It was my second Ashiro after The Buried Giant, which practically killed me. I read it much more later than I thought I did, but man, this book was so boring. So I was very intrigued to read Claire, which is probably similarly boring to many people, and yet I really loved it. So his expression of themes and the way that he talks about themes and person and memory and stuff like that is very intriguing, and this is his most famous book. It has a lot to do with memory, an older man, middle-aged man thinking about his youth and his boarding school days. I don't really want to know a lot because a man does not really write plots, he writes just like themes. So yeah, this is a book that I'm hoping to read in the month of September. Our next book is Small Favors by Erin A. Craig, and this is her second book after A House of Salt and Sorrow, which is a book that I read last year and really enjoyed. It was a YA horror book that has some elements of fantasy that is based on the 10 Dancing Princesses. I believe it's based on Rumpelstiltskin by basing on the plot. It's about, you know, magic comes at a price. I really want to do Rumpelstiltskin for Once Upon a Time. That was my love back in the day. Well, like I was not in love with him, but the show was my love. I really loved his depiction of that. So I really hope that that is a depiction of it. It's this idea that this man is offering magic, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a price. And we have this woman who has a beehive. I don't really understand what the synopsis is saying. It's saying a lot that I just don't understand, and I really don't care to know a lot, but I am very intrigued to read this and enjoy it. I think that the ending of the last book was too fluffy for my loving. Like, I wanted it to be much more dark, but I am very intrigued to read more Erin A. Craig. Next, we have 50 short stories, and these are a collection of short stories from around the world that are classic and wonderful. I meant to read them over the summer, and I've read like 4 or 5 of them. I read Steinbeck. There was other things in there that I read that I'm clearly forgetting right now, but I'm very intrigued to, Salander, there was some Steinbeck and some Salander and, you know, all of the male authors in the world. I think there's some Virginia Woolf and Sylvia Plath and some other authors that I love, and I'm very excited to read this. I have really been falling in love with short stories, and these are many classic ones. Ooh, and there's also Mansfield that I read. Yeah, there's lots in there. This is the book that I forgot to write a note of. Locomotion? Locomotion? Yeah. Every time I do a TBR, I of course have to forget the description of one book or just don't know them. And this is Locomotion by Jacqueline Woodson. I really, really enjoy her as an author. I'm just saying that over and over again because I'm reading a lot of my favorite authors this month. But this is a story that I don't know about it, but I'm assuming it's by a Black boy coming of age, I think, based on the cover. But I really just enjoy the way that she writes and her care of characters and her care of themes and her writing. She's a poet as well, so I know I'm going to enjoy this, even though I have no idea what it's about. And then last but certainly not least, we have Death Comes to the Archbishop by Willa Cather. In July, I read 3 books by Willa Cather, and I'm enjoying the exploration into her prairie fiction. I never really thought that I would read her, but I'm very intrigued by her, and especially after reading 3 books by her, to read another one. And I believe this follows an old archbishop in a town and his life, and I don't really know what else. I don't really want to know that much, but I am very intrigued to read it. This is the last book that is available online as audiobook from my library, and I kind of want to do a series of talking about her as an author after I've read 3 of her books, one of our own, My Antonia and O Pineris, and I enjoyed all of them. So I'm very intrigued to finish off this last famous work and to do a wrap of her thoughts. This last book that talks about an old man, because she deals a lot with memory about aging and how life changes, how town changes, and just a lot of very flawed characters living their lives and their memories. I hope that you enjoyed going through the books that I hope to read. Let me know your thoughts on them. Have you read them? Have you wanted to read them? Do you hate any of them? I always love those Spitfire beliefs and thoughts. And I will talk to you soon, and have a great day.